I thought we're moving on to Moses and the Exodus, so like a good biblical scholar, I went up and got my commentary on Genesis. I thought, oh no, it's not in there, is it? It's in Exodus. But we moved on to Exodus. And just as with all of Hebrews, talking about faith, it's just dipping into it. And as soon as you get into the Old Testament, you start into a huge panorama of wonderful stuff and say, no, we're not doing the Old Testament really. But here's just a taster from Exodus 2, the birth of Moses and the bulrushes business, you know. During this time, a man from the tribe of Levi married a woman of his own tribe, and she bore him a son. When she saw that he was what a fine baby he was, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him any longer, she took a basket made of reeds and covered it with tar to make it watertight. She put the baby in it and placed it in the tall grass at the edge of the river. And the baby's sister stood some distance away to see what would happen to him. The king's daughter came down to the river to bathe, and while her servants walked along the bank, suddenly she noticed the basket in the tall grass and sent a slave woman to get it. The princess opened it and saw a baby boy. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked her, "Shall I go and call a Hebrew woman to act as a wet nurse?" "Please do," she answered. So the girl went and brought the baby's own mother. The princess told the woman, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So she took the baby and nursed him. Later, when the child was old enough, she took him to the king's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. She said to herself, "I pulled him out of the water, and so I named him Moses." When Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his people, the Hebrews, and he saw how they were forced to do hard labor. He even saw an Egyptian kill a Hebrew, one of Moses' own people. Moses looked all round, and when he saw that there was no one watching, he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day, he went back and saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. He said to one who was in the wrong, "Why are you beating up your fellow Hebrew?" The man answered, "Who made you our ruler and judge? Are you going to kill me just as you killed that Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said to himself, "People have found out what I have done." When the king heard about what had happened, he tried to have Moses killed. But Moses fled and went to live in the land of Midian. Then picking up the headlines from Hebrews 11, just to remind ourselves about faith in the first 2 verses. To have faith is to be sure of the things we hope for, to be certain of the things we cannot see. It was by their faith that people of ancient times won God's approval. Then in verse 23, it was faith that made the parents of Moses hide him for 3 months after he was born. They saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's order. It was faith that made Moses, when he had grown up, refuse to be called the son of God, the king's daughter. He preferred to suffer with God's people rather than to enjoy sin for a little while. He reckoned that to suffer scorn for the Messiah was worth far more than all the treasures of Egypt, for he kept his eyes on the future reward. It was faith that made Moses leave Egypt without being afraid of the king's anger. As though he saw the invisible God, he refused to turn back. It was faith that made him establish the Passover and order the blood to be sprinkled on the doors, so that the angel of death would not kill the firstborn sons of the Israelites. It was faith that made the Israelites able to cross the Red Sea as if it were dry land. When the Egyptians tried to do it, the water swallowed them up. As we move on in thinking about these great men of faith, I hope from thinking about right through Abraham and what have you, that we are pulling together various thoughts about faith and bringing them together and being able to make them work together. What Moses seems to bring, particularly in Exodus, is that faith is a narrative, that faith is a journey, sometimes literally from one place to another, but faith is not just a static thing. I have now learned more, I believe more, I have deeper faith. It's a journey, even if it's not a physical journey. I used to believe that, now I've moved on to believe that. I used to believe that I had to look after myself entirely, but now I have faith that Jesus will look after me. It's a journey. You move from one to the other. I used to be mean, and now because I believe in Jesus, I can be generous. I used to use my time for my own being, but now I've become to believe in Jesus, and I have extra faith in God. Then I move to a different timetable, a different diary, a different set of priorities. And even in religious things, I thought it ought to always be like this. I always did this. I always prayed like that. I always worshipped like that. I always did this in the church, and I never did that in the church. But now, in faith, called by God, I have moved to do this, and I read it differently, and I read the Bible more, and I pray in a different way, and I worship in a different way, and I say different things in the church council. It's a narrative, it's a journey, it's an exodus from here to there, even if it's a very small thing. If you just start with Abraham and those two thoughts that we had in the last month or so, the one is that if you're going to move, you've got to leave something. And God said to Abraham in Genesis, leave your country, And also the sense he didn't settle in the sense that he was always on the move because he didn't settle because he was different. He saw it differently. Remember I said he walked to a different drum. He had a different map, if you like. And if we are men and women of faith, they don't get it. We have a different map. They don't see it the same. Those two things come together. And in many ways, the most useful verse in this passage is actually not, Moses has got a sort of lie-on part anyway. 23, it was faith that made the parents of Moses hide him for 3 months after he was born. You can see with these parents of Moses, without whom there would have been no Exodus, as we know it. This is a pivotal verse about faith, and Moses is only just lying around crying. Interesting, isn't it, how that relates to the Christmas story. It is their faith, and what is crucial to this moving on and to leaving is the sense in which, if you look at what's happened, Pharaoh has decreed that all the baby boys of the Hebrews will be killed. In those days, the girls could live, but all the boys would be killed, and they were all killed. So this is genocidal, but it was that sort of state in those days. There was no sort of United Nations or European Court of Human Rights or anything like that. They were just killed. And yet this couple decided that they would not conform. What this tells us about faith is that it's not when you begin something new, you believe something new, and you weren't doing anything before, and let's move. The picture I had was, let's leave the car park and go. Faith is not just like leaving the car park. Because I quite like leaving places. Quite interesting to leave, isn't it? Interesting to belt down to Dover and get on, just get on the ferry and go, sort of thing. That sense of if I've decided to follow Jesus rather than not doing anything. Now I'm going to follow Jesus. Now I'm going to have some faith from not doing anything. We don't just. I said a few weeks ago, Abraham left his parents, his land, his this, his that. It's not easy. There is tethering, I think we called it. Well, this builds on that. When you come to step out in faith, in some kind of small journey of faith, to believe something new, you will not find, that's a nice, interesting venture. I'll just do that, shall I? Rather than not doing anything. It'll be more interesting than doing nothing. Where this starts from is a huge, crushing military, political, societal control. Egypt was these ancient states were very, very rigid. The king was a god, And everybody worshipped the king, which was helpful, really, if you wanted to be a dictator, to be a god, that sort of bit of help. And it's it works its way down through all the guilds and all the class structure and down to the slaves. Everybody did what they were told. Everybody knew their place. Nobody really had a say in anything at all. So, interestingly, with all these slaves, when they were told that all their firstborn children, male children, were going to die, there was no evidence of a slave revolt. They all just wept and they all died, because that's what you did if you were a slave. It's a mentality. Some of you know the story of when they were punished later on, and they'd been building bricks, and the punishment would be, you will have no straw to make the bricks. They said, we can't do it without the straw, and they protested, but it didn't protest about making the bricks. If you make the straw, if you give us the straw, we'll make the bricks and build your pyramids and what have you. But that's the way it was. That's the way slavery was. I tell you this because when these two decided that they would hide the baby and then put the baby in the bulrushes as an act of faith to see what would happen to him, it says, doesn't it? They become non-conformists. They cease to conform. They cross a line. They cross a line in which society and all the structures and all the weight of tradition and ways of doing things and every protocol, they cross a line. They cease to conform. They go in a different direction. And in going in a different direction is immediately difficult and risky and dodgy. And it's not, hey, let's save the baby. It's, let's defy the system. Let's do what nobody else has done. Jesus is a total nonconformist, isn't he? They always think they're going to tie him down. And then Jesus subtly always does something slightly different. They expect him to do this, and he doesn't do it. They expect him to say this, and he says something slightly different. We've never seen anything like this, they said. Jesus, he says, look, you've got a new patch. You need to put it on a new coat. I'm new wine, looking for new wineskins. And I would challenge you this morning with the fact that if you would like, and I encourage you to make small steps of faith and take small journeys, this week in faith, in a relationship, in forgiving somebody, in giving to something, in changing your timetable, in changing your priorities and the way you read the Bible, in what you believe God for this week. Pick something new to believe God for this week. If you're going to do that, you will come up against, if it's any good anyway, you will come up against the fact that we are programmed by society and our history and our education and our peer group and our families, and a huge pressure of expectation and protocols and the way of doing things. And you'll think, well, this is not as easy as I thought. We're all doing things. I know you'd all like to say me, but I'm a free man. We are not free men. My education drove into me all sorts of ideas of things like what duty means, what honour means, which in some places have been good and some places have been bad, but it's hugely strong, And your family, the way your family does things, your loved ones, their expectations, even your timetable, what you do and how you think about it and how you use it. And as soon as you want to plough a different furrow, for you to say, I am not going to conform, to say, I'm going to extricate myself. You see, to believe is to extricate yourself. To believe is to go with Jesus, and he's just not going with everybody else. Occasionally or it might be my wife, I don't know, but me, actually spilled something on the floor in the back kitchen, on the lino, and you can't tell what it is, can you? And you mop it up, and it doesn't happen, doesn't it? And from then on, for the next few days, you walk across there, and it's sticky, isn't it? You go... And walking in faith is like walking in super glue, because we are. And notice not only that, but where it really gets bad, it's not where there's this is an internal locus of control, isn't it, in modern terms? I'm afraid to move because I'm reinventing myself in faith, aren't I? I'm believing something about myself and about the world that I did not believe. It's not just that. It's actually when you do something. I'm sure all the Hebrews hated the Egyptians, and all the Hebrew mothers thought their babies were beautiful boys. But they didn't hide their baby in the bulrushes. It's when you actually do something from that faith is full of all these people. Hebrews is not full of people who have interesting ideas. Hebrews is full of people who do interesting things. It's when you cross the line, isn't it? When you do something. I've not been good at this always. I've lived in a fairly conservative environment or something, But if you actually do something and you cross the line and you're out of line, everybody goes. And it's not just you reinventing yourself, but society doesn't like it. Culture defends itself. That's what a culture is. And a culture like the Egyptians, with all this hierarchical structure and all these hundreds of thousands of slaves, was very fragile. You had to make an example. The baby would have been killed, but probably the parents would have been killed. And we find with Moses that huge opposition to him when he goes to Pharaoh and the court and the bureaucracy and all this kind of thing. And it culminates in the end, there he is by the Red Sea, and the entire Egyptian army is deployed to defend the system. People will not like it. And it's when we say, well, I shan't be available then because I shall be doing that. What? What are you doing? It's when you get to your monthly bank statement and somebody says, where's all this money gone? And you say, actually, I gave that to so-and-so. What? It's when you're at a little dinner party, with some friends, and very well some of them are Christians and some of them aren't, and there's a bit of a discussion going around, and one of the chief candidates says, well, of course I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't believe in God at all. And everybody normally goes, yeah, all right. And you say, how bizarre. Whatever gave you that idea? And there's this great hush, isn't there? And the hostess rushes off for the next course. It wasn't the faith to believe that's nuts. It was the faith to say that's nuts, isn't it? It's when you're trying to identify why some of these people sitting on the pavement. It's not when you think, something needs to be done about that. It's when actually, I gather the best way to deal with people who sit on the pavement is to sit on the pavement. But it's been said that sitting on the pavement is one of the major steps in the whole social structure. When you're on the pavement, it's a different world. I've run sort of things as a student where we had all these posters, Jesus is alive today. And it was extraordinary that you felt, man, I've crossed a line here. I've got this poster now in my window. I always believed Jesus was alive today, but now in faith I've put up a poster and people are sucking their teeth as always a weirdo. I organised a demonstration in the university town I was in. And lots of big churches. How few people wanted to go on the demo? They believed it, but they didn't want to be seen, Anybody who's tried street preaching? You lined up there. Anybody who's done any drama in the street? Oh, they're going to see me. Listen. Anybody who's tried to do something new in church that's never been done before? You're all right this morning having ideas about things, but you have trouble when you try and do anything. To do something in faith against the grain of your family, of yourself, of society, of the church most of all. You see, Jesus spent most of his time arguing with the religious authorities that were trying to defend the status quo. Is to, if you like, write Christian graffiti on the concrete wall of atheism. Go home and write some Christian graffiti on the concrete wall of atheism. Who put it there? Wash it off. And when you look at this faith move, this faith step, just say a couple of things about it before we finish. It is definitely learned. If you think, I've not got it in me. I had a laugh. Well, I was amused when Hebrews said that that Moses left Egypt not being afraid of the wrath of Pharaoh, which is precisely the first time what he does. He messes up, doesn't he? He starts, I want to be a non-conformist. I want to relate to my family, but I also want to live in the palace. Robin Hood eats in the evening in Nottingham Castle sort of thing, isn't it? He wants it both. And it all goes badly wrong and he kills the Egyptian. And what happens? It says that in Exodus. He learned that the king was after him. He left Egypt terrified of the king. It's not what Hebrews says. So he's got to learn all through that terrible time with all the plagues and all this sort of thing. He's slowly built up so that when we get to Exodus 14:13, when he finally leaves Egypt with the Israelites and they're by the Red Sea and they're all terrified and they're all saying, we'd have better been off slaves. He says, quote, "And Moses answered, 'Do not be afraid. Stand your ground and you will see what the Lord will do to save you today.'" Now, you see, he's ploughing a lone furrow. Now he's leaving Egypt without the fear of Pharaoh. We need to learn that. Something you're going to have your ups and downs with this. It's something you learn. Try something small to plough your own furrow. There will be temptations to go back and be a slave. The whole family was upset. Grandma was in tears. Oh, we can't stick this. I'm sorry, I was just having a religious 5 minutes. I didn't mean it. I'll just go back and conform. I'm sorry. I didn't want to offend anybody. Sort of thing. If you're going to be like this, you are going to offend people, It's learned. We progress. We get better at it. We have our ups and downs. I suspect Peter in the New Testament occasionally had a bit of a row in the fish market, but nothing like the rows he had when he was after Pentecost, when he was building the church. But he learned it. He got better. He was a lot better than he was before the crucifixion, where they said, "You were with him, weren't you? You were found. You are not in line with the rest of us, are you?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm in line. I've never seen the guy before." That's the basic thing. We learn it. It's progressive. We've said this before. We don't have to labour that now. Remember what I said about bequeathing. This small family on these few weeks predicate the Exodus. It's not just that faith builds one to the next. It's that small bit was valuable. When I was at school, we had junior school, middle school and senior school. We did, athletics. Best thing I found was doing the medley relay. We did it in yards in those days, so it was longer. But we did 100 yards, then 220 yards, then 440 yards. They finished up with another 100 yards. And so we had all these sprinters and that's it. And we didn't have anybody in our house to do the 440, the middle, the long leg. So I had to go up. I was a junior running with the seniors, and they were all sort of chariots of fire athletes sort of thing. And I was just sort of very small. And I remember running round this 440, and I went like a bomb round here. And this bloke was just catching me. I could hear catching round the last bend. My gosh, was I glad to just use the elbow, keep him out, and hand over the baton, And then he went on and won it for us. We hand on the baton, but our bit is big. That little family saving that baby does Exodus. Never say about the system, well, what can I do? What difference am I going to make? In faith, this faith step might be good, but it's not going to make any difference. What change could I make in my life, my family, my community? What change could I make? The church has always been like, it's never going to change, is it? What change could I make? And it's subversive. I like that. Faith is subversive. Starts off saving one baby and brings down the entire Egyptian regime. It destroys the entire Egyptian army. It brings their economy to a standstill with no slaves. They are in bits. One faith move with one baby. Isn't it good to feel that you can bring the whole thing down? It'd be good to sense that this whole agnostic, atheist, secularist stuff can be brought down. Just cracking the wall, But I just want to say one thing to finish with. Hebrews, in talking about faith, is clearly talking about men of faith, and you are called to make decisions and cross the line this week. But God will meet you in that. Faith brings us into a place where God picks it up and runs with it. He's the last one. What is the statistical probability that the princess of Egypt, the daughter of Pharaoh, would have turned up, found the baby, rescued the baby, had the baby brought up by his own mother, for goodness sake, then taken him into the higher echelons of society to educate him and to give him all the skills that he needed to do all that negotiation with Pharaoh in the days to come? What is the likelihood of that? Is it not more likely he's going to be eaten by a crocodile, for goodness sake? Because God takes that to see what would happen to him. God picks up the faith and runs with it. You see a lot of posters these days. There's a lot of posters next door, actually. And they mean well on the wall, which say, just believe. Faith is not just believing. When it gets to them being by the side of the Red Sea, this is great. I thought this was great. It was by faith that made the Israelites able to cross the Red Sea as if on dry land. When the Egyptians tried to do it, the water swallowed them up. This is not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of them looking at all these walls of water and saying, I can't do it. Yes, you can. Just believe. They walked through. Let me tell you, the Egyptians thought, yes, we can. Let's go through. And they all got drowned. This is, yes, I believe in God. Yes, I believe in Jesus, not, yes, I believe. This is not breaking out of society's structures. This is not breaking out of the milieu. This is not just sort of being a non-conformist in a general sense and one of the awkward squad. This is not just saying one man can change the world. That is just not on. This is about God. God who changes the world. God who picks up the baby. God who moves the Red Sea. You know, it's all water funny, isn't it? It's always water, just like with Noah. God who picks up. And when you have faith this week, if you will get out of line, if you will cause a bit of chaos, if you will, I remember when I did drill, it wasn't just if you were out of line or out of step. They shouted at you because you stood out. It's because you caused chaos amongst everybody else. And worst of all, some people would follow you. Think you could do that with a step of faith this week. And God will pick it up and run with it. And when God picks it up and runs with it, wow, what a great thing that is. And they crossed 600,000 crossed the Red Sea. One baby. Could you not step out of line this week? Cause a bit of graffiti on the wall. You know, just do something that thinks, and see where God will lead us and pick us up.